Let's go!
So Final Fantasy XVI appears to actually be a thing. It's a real game. We're gonna, I'm not even kidding you, we have to like watch the trailer at some point again because it has been so long since I have seen that trailer that I barely even remember what happens in it. It feels like a lifetime ago at this point. According to Audrey, and it appears that Yoshi-P just can't keep his mouth shut. He appears like he seems to be pretty proud of what they're doing and he wants to talk about it. This is kind of exciting that in a NieR Reincarnation stream, which was like an FF, like I think it's like a Final Fantasy XIV NieR crossover sort of thing. I might be wrong. But they're saying how the trailer for the game is done. The trailer is finished, but certain factors caused the announcement to be delayed, but it should drop soon. They're ready to show it off. The dev team has spent a long time polishing and debugging the game, which, okay, this all means a lot of things. And the game is pretty much complete. Pretty much complete. Okay, people are like, oh, it's gonna be out. No. No, that's not what that means. People don't understand how games development kind of works and how that can still be a large period of time. But there is a conclusion here, and it's from this quote, that they spent a long time polishing and debugging the game. And this is essentially like, polishing and debugging are kind of the same thing, where you get to a point where the game is essentially content finished, you know, where they are like trying to get to the part where, okay, everything's there, everything's in place. It's just that there's a couple of things that don't flow super well. And a lot of games that go through a development process can get limiting to less and less and less amounts of polish time, which is very unfortunate because polishing, sometimes some games really need a lot of polish. If anything, the games that got this back in the day that are very relevant, like Kojima games, right? Kojima games that had like Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear 3, even Metal Gear 4. These games that had like a lot of crazy mechanics and things that were unique with the AI that you could do. And when you got into the game to do them, they mostly worked. Like the functionality of all the crazy gimmicks that the game was setting up was actually working. It was kind of nuts, regardless of the story being weird or, you know, anything like that. Even in Metal Gear 5, like I got to give Metal Gear 5 a ton of credit. The gameplay polish in that game was ridiculous. Like suddenly you had a game that felt like it was super polished until you got to the end of the game and then, oh, there's no polish here. Like, oh God, the end of the game is literally missing. It's a good example of like how things can feel really good and they can tighten up the game experience as much as possible. I'm seeing news sites running my quote, the game is pretty much complete equals the game is done. That's not correct. Literally saying it's greatly taking shape. But I took context from that plus uniquely blurb. Oh. Well, no, that's literally what I'm saying. If game sites are saying Final Fantasy XVI is done by this, no. If they're in polishing and debugging like part of the game, no, that can still take a very long time. That's literally exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's funny that people would take that as context that the game is finished and ready to go, because no, that is not the case, especially with a high-profile game like a mainline Final Fantasy. If the development of this game was going relatively smooth and they were given a large amount of time to polish, chat, I can't even remember what's the last big Final Fantasy game that got a ton of polish. Probably 7 Remake. I think 7 Remake really felt like it was a pretty goddamn polished game. Some of the content didn't feel super polished, but Final Fantasy 15 when it came out was 100% not polished. There was a lot of rough elements in that shit. If we're talking about mainline, I don't know, man, maybe like 13? Even though I'm not a fan of 13, I could say that probably felt relatively polished, but do I agree with like what kind of game it was? Not really, you know? Not really, but it was pretty polished, right? It was like, damn, this is, they really tightened this up and this is the way the game is. 15 was very rough at the start. And the reason 15 was a rough game at the start is because its development was horribly troubled. The game turned into like 4 different games before it eventually came out. And when it eventually came out, they had to hobble together all the crazy shit that they had been doing before to turn it into something cohesive. Like 15 coming out the way it did was a miracle. And then you actually get the what's it called? The Royale version of the game, which is way better and a substantially better game, gameplay wise and story wise and just polish wise, right? You get to see what they were doing with that polish. That's why I kind of have to defend FF15 a bit. It was really bad at the start, But if you actually play through Royale, it's quite good. And there's actually a pretty good story. So yeah, there was a misquote from a lot of people saying that the game is done from this initial quote from Audrey. No, they're probably in a state where the game has been content complete and they've been spending most likely a lot of this year doing things like polishing and debugging, which is just making sure if you press menu, it doesn't break your system. Trailer is done. Certain factors caused the announcement to be delayed. Is there any other information? Just for some clarification. She says she wants to add the debugging and polishing is still going and is not finished. Yoshi-P expects that they will want to take their time with polishing the game further. This all is really good news. This might end up being the smoothest development Final Fantasy game in possibly a decade and a half. If hopefully it's good, right? We don't even know if it's good. But based on what's happening here, based on like when it was announced to when it could possibly come out, which there's now a possibility it could be this year, the development of the game could be in a state that is significantly different than so many other previous Final Fantasy games, which were hobbled together. Even FF7 Remake, everybody knows that game went through a development hell at the start. And then the actual dev time that they really spent on FF7 Remake was about 2 to 2.5 years. They put together FF7 Remake Part 1 in 2 to 2.5 years. So that's where I got to give Square some credit. They did some shit to make that all work out very well, considering the quality the game came out in. Also, there's some interesting shit here, is that Square has gone on a big hiring spree of some pretty insane Japanese talent. There was a lead combat designer at Capcom responsible for like big things like Devil May Cry games and stuff that left Capcom and worked at Square and is now or has been working at Square. And there's been some others, right? Some other very similar positions that have been filled for specifically some roles in some games, but we don't know exactly what it is. Worked on Dragon's Dogma Combat as well. That makes sense. All things considered, it makes a lot of sense because Final Fantasy XVI is looking to be more of an action game than ever before. And a lot of those people responsible for that shit is going to be potentially working on this. All this like stuff that we're talking about now is relevant to the scape where the old trailer might look, this game might look and play substantially different almost 2 years since we've seen it. And that leaves me kind of excited. It's like, yo, so what did all those combat designers, what did all these new people that jumped into Square, what did they do to the game? And that's gonna be a big telling point for the next trailer. They mentioned that they spent Golden Week working on some urgent stuff. Golden Week is like a week off in Japan, like 10 days or so. And they made some adjustments to the marketing plan for Final Fantasy XVI. He said the FF16 dev team is working their hardest on the game. Regarding the game being pretty much complete, here's the quote, literal translation, the game is greatly coming together. However, I'd like for the dev team to spend more time on polishing it further. Cool. You know what? This is very much lining up with exactly what Yoshi-P said, what was it, like a year and a half, like a long time ago, where he said the next time you see us is going to be when the game is nearly complete. And we will give you a new trailer that will represent the current game. That was happening, he said that around the same time frame when they were hiring all the new devs, right? When a lot of like the Capcom devs, the ex-Capcom devs were moving over. That's actually very good news. It means that we're getting there. That there's literally a close, the door is being approached and now we just have to open it. The 16 info Yoshida gave during this NieR stream correlates to what he said at the Uniqlo stream about the game beginning its final stages of development. He also says the PR team got mad at him for making that comment. Yes, that is normal. So now we got some concrete news on the game. And here's the crazy part. If they have a trailer that's finished and they're not releasing it, why aren't they releasing it? Because not E3 is right around the corner. So Summer Games Fest, the rumors of potentially State of Plays, Microsoft has an event. I don't know if Nintendo has an event. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that is going to be happening in less than or just about a month, right? All I think it is that Jeff probably has the trailer, right? There has already been big moments of Square Enix reveals that have been directly tied to Jeff Keighley in some way. So I think Jeff has probably seen the trailer and he already knows what it is and they're probably getting ready for that shit. It still ties back to what Yoshi-P was saying a while ago, and is that when you see the trailer, the game is going to be like nearly done. I'll break you guys down a timeline of even if they're nearly done, what that means. What that means is that if they spent another month or two after the reveal trailer polishing stuff up, which is about like a very polished time frames for games will be within like a few months time frame. Most of the time, like a polish period for big titles will somewhere boil between 2 to 6 months, and 6 months is like very fucking generous, right? I don't think it's going to get that. I think it's still going to need to hit some sales metrics. I still think it needs to hit this fiscal year. And there is also the sake of Forspoken that is going to be coming out relatively soon. Forspoken is what, September? It's like fall 2022. I'll give you guys a timeline. If the game is announced and we see the trailer in a month and they get like another month of polish, that leads them into July. Going gold is one thing, right? Going gold is like it's getting pressed to discs type of thing. When it actually leaves their hands, and it's like, all right, it's done. Anything that comes after this is going to have to be in a patch. This is essentially what's getting sent to the ESRB type of shit for review, you know? The game is content complete at that point. Even if that happens, you still got to wait 3 months. So if they finish this stuff and it's July and we get to like August or something like that, there still is going to be a 3-month difference in between. What I'm saying is if they choose to show this in June, it's seemingly a very similar release window to Forspoken, which they probably will not do. They're not going to send a mainline Final Fantasy game directly against Forspoken, a not so mainline Final Fantasy game. You know, Forspoken would essentially be sent to the land of the dead or whatever the hell that girl is blasted to. That leads me to either two possibilities. I still think it's coming out this year. My bet is that I think Final Fantasy XVI will still be this year. Forspoken might come out like early October, and I would not be surprised if they actually stick Final Fantasy XVI as a holiday release. The next best bet is something early 2023, right? Somewhere between like January to March, because the Japanese fiscal year that they gauge all their quarterly metrics on ends at like on April 1st of every year. April 1st, 2022 to April 1st, 2023. That counts as their fiscal year. So for the majority of these companies, they'll try to get a lot of games out before the end of March. And there's a pretty good chance that this would be around that time frame. Here's the crazy part. A lot of devs usually don't sit on content complete stuff. You know, if there was a situation where it's like, oh, we can't release against Forspoken, we have to push ourselves to March, right? That is not usually what happens, because the devs in these companies aren't unique to one project. The devs get split and moved to other things, and once they're done with one thing, they got to go to the next thing, right? Like not a lot of game development is like, we finished our game, like an indie thing. We finished our game, cracked the champagne, great job. Like there's a little bit of that, but it's mostly like, get the fuck back to work, right? The next game, we have to start making the next game. It's a job. So all those devs don't just keep polishing the game for like several months most of the time. They have to immediately move to the next project, and pulling them back onto a project if something weird happens doesn't make any goddamn sense. Nintendo is different. Everyone's saying Nintendo, and you are absolutely right. But Nintendo acts almost completely unique than any video game company in the fucking world. All I'm saying is that this is kind of a pickle. If the game is seemingly done by like the end of this summer, and they've already spent a lot of time polishing and debugging, that those devs have to go somewhere. Those devs have to be lined up for the next project, or some big next project, right? Whether or not it's the big next expansion of, I don't know, Final Fantasy XIV, them doing the graphics rehaul, whatever, like any of that kind of stuff. Maybe Forspoken, I'm gonna say this right now, this is a crackpot theory. Maybe Forspoken was delayed for a multitude of reasons. Maybe it was delayed to get the fuck away from Final Fantasy XVI. Either way, what's the most important thing about this? Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. It all boils down. Everything boils down to FF7 Remake Part 2. And I was saying this, that you're not going to see anything on 7 Remake Part 2 until we have a ton of details, if not Forspoken, and Final Fantasy XVI is practically released. Even the FF7 Remake devs said that, like, hey, yeah, this is the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII. Pretty sure that we have to do something about that, right? Pretty sure that we're going to have to show you guys 7 Remake Part 2 because it's the 25th anniversary, right? Literally said that shit. It was like, what? Are you serious? What? You know, they want to show something. I think like the crazy ass blast of this whole situation could be that the game is shown off in literally a month. Game is shown off next month. We see it. It looks substantially better and different is what I hope. And it looks really good. And then it comes out like 2 months later. Like that'd be fucking nuts if it was like, hey, It's out at the beginning of August.